Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare सब लोग प्रेम से बोले हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे श्री श्री गौणिताय कृष्ण बलराम राधे श्याम सुंदर की जय
बोलो वृंदावन बिहारी लाल की। हरे कृष्णा। सभी भक्तों से अनुरोध है, मंदिर बंद हो चुका है, मंदिर खाली करें, मंदिर की सफाई होगी, शूज स्टैंड लॉकर मेन गेट बंद होने वाले हैं, गेटों पर पहुंचो। मंदिर शाम को 4:30 बजे खुलेगा, फिर आना। हरे कृष्णा। हरे कृष्णा। सभी भक्तों से अनुरोध है, मंदिर बंद हो चुका है, मंदिर खाली करें, मंदिर की सफाई होगी, शूज स्टैंड लॉकर मेन गेट बंद होने वाले हैं, गेटों पर पहुंचे। मंदिर शाम को 4:30 बजे खुलेगा, फिर आना। हरे कृष्णा।
They carried on in Hindi and they usually ended up in total laughter. Guruji, after the program of Vedantic readings and chanting, Guruji would turn over the latter part of the evening to Swamiji. And he would try to caution him. And he'd say, Swamiji, only 15 minutes remaining. At most 20 minutes, Swamiji. And Swamiji would look at him very sincerely and say, I know, people need rest, it is late. I will do a little bit chanting. But it was to no avail, because once Swamiji went into that divine chanting, the bhakti chanting, he lost all sense of time and space every time he chanted. And it was seldom that it was less than an hour. And Guruji knew it. It was his joke with Swami Bhaktivedanta. He was serious only when he was chanting or talking about Krishna consciousness. But when he was relating to people, and certainly relating to Guruji, his face would light up. He had a radiance because he was happy. When Swamiji was happy, it showed. He, I guess because he did a lot of traveling on his own, had become self-sufficient in the kitchen. And he also loved, absolutely loved, to make meals for Guruji. And he would make a lot of food. So we knew when Swamiji was cooking that he could serve about 20 people, although he was cooking mainly for Guruji. And we would gather around as he was cooking. We wanted to learn from him what he was doing. So we would ask him questions, and he wouldn't answer because he'd be totally absorbed in his moment-to-moment activity. And although we were in a happy mood because we were anticipating a lovely meal and being with the two of them, he just remained serious until the last morsel was being finished. And he was just one-pointed in everything he did. I always felt about him he was a deeply serious man, serious about life. He never talked about his past, his personal life. I did ask him once or twice, question here and there, and he waved it away. He said, not important. That's not important. And then I began to feel it wasn't important. What was important was what he was doing now. There's only once when he touched me so much, I asked if I could hug him. He said something like, why not? Because nobody touched him usually. Guruji did. He would put his arm around him. But this was after I knew him for a while. But it was the Indian way of hugging. You know, somehow they managed to hug you and be miles apart in the hug. But at the same time, although the bodies were kept apart, it's only really the shoulders that come together. It's Indian style. But I felt Swamiji's love. He was a tender man, he was a caring man, and an innocent man. And in the company of innocency, you relax completely. And so I was always relaxed with Swami Bhaktivedanta.
That's when I decided I wanted to get into film, and when I came back to America, I took 2 courses at Columbia, and then I was lucky enough to get a job with Leacock Pennybaker, who were the preeminent cinema verite documentarians, and there I learned to edit, to take sound, and this film that we're talking about was my first venture as a cameraman. This was entirely on our own, and we selected this because this was a movement that was different. I also was touched by, in a sense, their naivete. One of the people, I remember asking him how he felt. He said, "Oh, this is the most wonderful thing. I am so moved. I want to devote my entire life to this." I said, "How long have you been involved?" He said, "Since yesterday."
We went to the storefront, Matchless Gifts, and I've always been so taken with that sign. I can still remember it. It was beautifully done, so artistic, saying Matchless Gifts, you know, wonderful colors and swirls and everything. So we entered. It was quite a simple room, and they were eating on the floor. And I don't remember any women being among that first group. My feeling about the Swami is that I think he was in some kind of a state, and I think that perhaps he passed something to us in that interview. But at the same time, I was having a very good time. I actually thought we were onto something big. You know, I have a journalist's instinct, but I also have it sounds terrible, a spiritual instinct. You know, after all, this was a very small little room. And the Swami was interviewed by us in the back, in a smaller little room with a curtain over it. So that's, to me, that's where it started. Now, maybe it started before in someplace else, but amazing, we were there. And for me, that's very significant.
Hayagriva first ran into Prabhupada on the street on Bowery, and Prabhupada invited him to come and attend his class that he was holding at 26 2nd Avenue. So he came back to the apartment and told me, and so the next night we both went to hear Prabhupada at 26 2nd Avenue. And I was very attracted to Prabhupada right from the start. His message rang a bell, and his voice, when he quoted the Sanskrit, it was just like music to me. At any rate, I very quickly became Prabhupada's assistant, and we would cook together for all the people that would come to share Prabhupada's lunch. Everything was put on Prabhupada's plate. And then from Prabhupada's plate, he would distribute chapatis and rice and dal and everything to 10, 15 people that gathered there. And there was always enough. Everyone was always full. We cooked the prasadam in his apartment kitchen, and we served it in his bedroom. We all sat around in a circle on the floor. He had no furniture. The thing that attracted me most to Prabhupada was his certainty. He didn't say, maybe this is the truth, or my opinion is. He wasn't like the professors I knew at Columbia. He spoke with finality. Krishna says in Bhagavad-Gita such and such, this is the way it is. And he was sure.
I was in a very desperate state. I was brought up middle class, Brooklyn Jewish TV dinner kind of background, kind of pampered, I guess. And here I was out in the streets in a dangerous part of town with no money and affected by LSD and my own unbalanced mind. And so I came to Prabhupada to ask him, rather than asking him, how could I somehow become more stable or some normal approach to my problem, I was just thinking of one thing. And I asked Swamiji, I told him, I work hard all day long. I'm like you. I'm also spreading the word, I'm also speaking to the people. And I thought I was preaching something. And Srila Prabhupada just looked at me, shook his head, and he spoke to me very strongly. And he said, simply join us. We will solve all your problems. Of course, in hindsight, we understand the depth of what Srila Prabhupada was talking about. No more birth, no more death, no more disease, no more old age. At that point, he handed me a cloth. I thought it was a dhoti, and I rejected it. I started stepping backwards. So as I was kind of walking backwards towards the door, I told him that I'm not quite ready, in a very halting manner. And as I was going out the door, Srila Prabhupada had his hand on the door frame, and I distinctly remembered he had a tear coming out of his eyes, and he said, please come back. Just like that. And, well, I did come back, but I didn't come back the way he wanted me to, right at that moment. I walked out, and I almost got killed by some thugs right around the corner, almost an instant reaction.
I remember his face. I don't remember his body. It's interesting. I remember his face. We did get these wonderful close-ups of his face. That's where his power, his focus, and his calm presence were all gathered in his face. But here, it was the beginning for us for meeting many spiritual masters. And it was also the beginning of the Hare Krishna movement. And it was also the beginning of a trend that grew towards the appreciation of Eastern religions in America.
We had a big tape recorder that weighed 50 pounds. I was in charge of that. Brahmananda would bring it down from Prabhupada's closet every night. So my job was to set up the tape for Prabhupada's lecture. Prabhupada was very insistent in having his lectures tape recorded. So much so that when the tape ran out, he would stop and wait for me to rethread the tape with a new one. In those days, we didn't have money, and those tapes were, I remember they were like $3, $4 for Scotch tapes. So Prabhupada wanted everything tape recorded. We didn't think it was important in those days. But now we do. They're important for preaching.
As usual, I just breezed into Srila Prabhupada's apartment, and I said, Swamiji, I'd like to do something to help, as if I were God's gift to the world or to his mission. But immediately, it's almost as if that's what he was waiting for. And immediately, Srila Prabhupada picked up this huge tray of prasadam and handed me this whole tray of prasadam and said, you could be the one who distributes the prasadam to the devotees. Those were his exact words. So I was, okay, I had not only a service, but a whole position now, that I was the prasadam distributor. But unfortunately, I was so spaced out that I was standing on the top of the stairs outside of Prabhupada's apartment to go down to the storefront, and I was just thinking how I'm going to negotiate the stairs and not drop the tray. And some hippie devotees, whoever they were, they grabbed it from me. They didn't have time to wait for this space case to decide how I was going to walk down the stairs. So I lost my service, but I did continue my service of taking prasadam.
In the beginning, there was only one or two who were thinking how to give Prabhupada something instead of just taking from him. Because I had asked Prabhupada, I said, Swamiji, you know, we're here with you, and what are we supposed to do? You know, we come here, we take Krishna Prasadam, and then we all go away. But what are we supposed to do for you? What are we here for? I wanted something definite. And Prabhupada said the duty of a disciple is to assist the spiritual master in his work. That's all he said. So then I thought, work? You know, later on I pondered on this subject, work. And I said, Prabhupada doesn't work. What does he do? You know, he doesn't have a job. He's a religious teacher. So then it occurred to me, there's one thing he does do every day, and that's translate books. And he's using this typewriter. Prabhupada wasn't a typist. You know, he used just his index fingers. I mean, that's how he was typing his books. So I was walking one day, because there was 4 or 5 head shops that would carry back to Godhead. And I would always stop in the shops to see if they're selling. So on my way, I passed this Grundig shop, and something in the window caught my eye. It was like a miniature tape recorder. And it said dictaphone. I said, what the hell is a dictaphone? So I went inside. And I went up to the man. I said, what's this dictaphone? He says, well, it's used by lawyers and doctors to keep notes. I go, oh, yeah? I said, I know somebody who's translating books. It would be good for him. He said, oh, yeah. So he showed me how to use it. And I said, you know, I'm going to buy this for Prabhupada. Now I'm helping him, because this will go a lot faster than typing. I mean, practically speaking, the dictaphone revolutionized Prabhupada's book, because he wanted to do the Gita. And so, you know, it would take ages for him to finish typing by hand. So it was like $150, I think. So I brought it to Prabhupada. You know, I was all excited and puffed up. You know, I said, this is, you know, helping Prabhupada. And so I thought, boy, how am I going to show Prabhupada how to use this thing? He's from the village, Vrindavan. They don't know what a dictaphone is. So I brought up to Prabhupada's room and I showed it to him. And, you know, I showed him the mic, you know, and he looked at it. I said, Prabhupada, there's an instruction book here how to use it. I'll go through it with you. He said, no, that's okay, I know. I was shocked. And sure enough, Prabhupada knew. He pressed the right buttons. He was testing it. And I was shocked. He never even looked at the book. It took me an hour with the guy. He had to show me everything. And here I'm showing it to someone from the village. And he didn't have to look at the book. And then I realized that this person, he's not human. I mean, how does he know how to work this thing? He never had one. Prabhupada was very easy with electronics. He wasn't at all intimidated. And then boom, Prabhupada started doing the tapes. I mean, it was great. But then we had the other problem. The tapes were building up, and the tapes were expensive. You know, at the end, we had like 6 or 7 tapes, and we didn't have money to keep buying tapes. For some reason, nobody knew how to type properly, because you have to have coordination. I think because we're all on LSD, nobody could coordinate their foot with their fingers. Because you had to use a foot pedal, and then you had to hear Prabhupada and coordinate, you know, like driving a car. And nobody could do it. So all of a sudden this Neil shows up. And he's from Antioch College. he has to do a summer course, 3 months course, joining a religious organization and writing about his experience. That was his paper. So he thought, hey, I'll join you guys. He said, I'm going to do it. I said, fine. So immediately asked him, do you know how to type? We just thought we'd ask. He goes, yeah, I can type. I said, do you know how to use a dictaphone? Oh, yeah, that's easy. And right away, the guy started typing 60 words a minute. And we used to watch his foot, man. The foot was going a mile a minute. He knew how to go back and go forward like in a second if he didn't understand anything. I mean, we go, wow. We looked at each other. This is mystical. Because this is the person we needed. And all of a sudden he shows up, knocking at the door. I mean, you don't know. The devotees then had an inner communication with each other. When things like this happen, we look at each other and go, wow, this is mystical. And then we understood that Krishna provides. That was the famous word. Krishna provides. That's why you really felt secure when you were with Prabhupada. Because you felt nothing could hurt you or touch you, and you felt wonderful. You always wanted to be around him because you felt fully protected. That feeling that everything's going to work out when you're with Prabhupada, because everything did work out.
The first dancing was in Tompkins Square Park, myself and Achyutananda. Prabhupada introduced this style of kirtan, which is very, very meditative. When Prabhupada sang in the park, that first time I danced, and Achyutananda got up and we danced. As I was dancing, I felt I should dance with the kirtan, and I should dance as long as Prabhupada has the kirtan. Not that I should stop dancing and sit down. That would somehow be disrespectful to the Swamiji. So I danced for as long as Prabhupada had the kirtan. And Prabhupada had the kirtan for 3 hours, non-stop. He was singing. And that's the way Prabhupada had it. Very long kirtans and very meditative. I once asked Srila Prabhupada, what is the best way to sing kirtan? He replied that you sing in such a way that you never get tired. So that the kirtan should be able to go on endlessly. The New York Times, they came to that kirtan and they took a photograph of Achyutananda and myself, and Prabhupada sitting there. You see the back of Prabhupada's head, and he's holding the bongo drum that he played. The caption was, "The Swami's flock finds ecstasy in the park." Prabhupada said the Times of New York was the most important newspaper in the world. This article, he said, marked the beginning of my movement.
One night I was walking down 2nd Avenue and I heard the ting, 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 ting. And so I walked over and I followed the sound. And it was the Krishna place, and there was Prabhupada. And they were chanting a mantra. And I had read that chanting mantras was the best kind of meditation. So I thought, well, maybe this is what I'm looking for. So I started to go in, but as I went in, I saw Prabhupada was shaking his head from side to side, like not to come in. So I stopped. But then I saw that he was just moving his head in time with the music. So I went in and sat down and started chanting. And then when Prabhupada spoke, he said, the Supreme Absolute Truth is a person. And when he said that, I knew that I had found my spiritual master. Because I had been reading all these Buddhist books that say you cannot describe the truth. You cannot say it is. You cannot say it is not. You cannot say it both is and is not. You cannot say it neither is nor is not. And they never tell you what the truth is. So here somebody told me what the truth was, and it really made sense. So then I started coming regularly. At that time, there was lecture kirtan every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday night. So anyway, after a while, I began to have a little doubt. I thought, well, I can see that the Swami is very honest. He's not cheating, but how do I know he really has knowledge? He could be a very honest man, but also be misled. And while I was thinking this, I didn't say anything to him, but I went to hear him lecture, and he said, I teach only what is in Scripture. So when he said that, then I thought, well, then there's no danger if he only teaches what's in Scripture. So that's how I started coming all the time. And then after a while, some of the guys started to do some kind of a service. And somebody would say, well, I'm doing this for the Swami, or someone else would say, I'm doing that for the Swami. So I thought, well, I'd better get in on this, because I thought he would maybe gather a few disciples and go off to a mountain cave somewhere and give them the secret teachings, you know. So I didn't want to miss out. So I went up to see Prabhupada. And I said, is there something I can do for you? And he said, yes, you can take notes in class and type them up. So the next day I took notes, but I really didn't know what kind of format to write them up with, so I tried something. And I showed it to Prabhupada, and then Prabhupada showed me what he was working on, and it was the essay, Who is Crazy? So then I knew that he wanted me to type the notes up in essay form. And Prabhupada said, and we will one day put all these essays together in a book and call it Practical Theology.
I was cooking for Prabhupada. Then it occurred to me that it would be nice to start a Sunday feast program. I explained to Prabhupada that in this country, people usually gather in their families together on Sunday and have a meal together. So I thought it would be a nice thing to have a love feast on Sunday when we could ask all the hippies and others who wanted to come and have a Krishna conscious feast. Prabhupada said, oh, that is a good idea. And that's the beginning of the love feast. We used to have the place packed every week. Every bit of prasad would be gobbled up. I cooked, Prabhupada cooked, Achyutananda cooked. We handed out flyers. I remember the first flyer, stay high forever. No more coming down. Practice Krishna consciousness.
How familiar these faces are. They are etched in my memory. And also I was very touched, in part because I am aware that this is important for the devotees. And being able to give the film to the movement is more of a gift to us, that we had something of value that was appreciated. And that was very rewarding to us. So it's matchless gifts for us.
On the first day that we went to Tompkins Square Park with Srila Prabhupada, then he had me dance holding up the picture of Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan. But after all, I put it down. Prabhupada said, why did you put it down? I said, well, I got tired. I had no idea what an honor it was to be holding that picture on the first kirtan with Prabhupada in the Western world. And what a momentous occasion it was. Of course, we didn't see this as a momentous occasion. Prabhupada did, but we didn't.
To see an Indian man in Indian dress in a park on Tompkins Square with, you know, majority of the people were old Russian and Polish people. You know, it was just too far out. So we used to go, you know, every weekend, Sundays, especially Sundays, you know, to Tompkins Square to chant with Prabhupada. And I would be in the crowd with the leaflets talking and inviting people. We used to make these leaflets called Stay High Forever. You know, people really got a kick out of those. And we used that photograph of Prabhupada where he's sitting and he's smiling and he's got his hand on his head. I mean, you know, that photo was like, people would look at that and say, wow, he is high. he's so high, he's trying to keep himself down just from the mantra.
Starting in November, he began lecturing on Chaitanya Charitamrita, Lord Chaitanya's teachings, to Sri Sanatana Goswami about Krishna's innumerable incarnations and how he has a road show and goes all over the universe, and every second appearing in another universe. The second being the first second in the second universe, and how he's in millions of universes at the same time. And he would say such interesting things, like if you give somebody just an atomic particle of ptomaine poisoning, a person would die just by an atom of that. So similarly, the soul is so tiny, but it gives all life to the body. We just didn't know what to call it. It's arti, but we just called it bells in those days. Prabhupada is doing, or Swamiji is doing bells. Later on, we learned about the genuine process of arti.
Srila Prabhupada was lecturing on the Chaitanya Charitamrita at 26th Avenue. He was talking about Krishna and the cowherd boys. It was very juicy. He was just talking about their pastimes and their playing in the forest. And it was so wonderful to hear him talking about that. But, and then he would talk about how the cowherd boys were thinking. And he said that they were always thinking about Krishna. They were always thinking Krishna, 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 Krishna. And he just kept going on and just Krishna, just repeating it. Krishna, 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 Krishna. I guess people would say he went into a trance. He was just saying Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. Now I remember particularly Brahmananda, who was sitting at Prabhupada's feet right next to him and looking up at Prabhupada. And Brahmananda started trembling. And then he let out a gasp. He just went, oh, like that. And I don't know if Prabhupada stopped when he heard that or not. But it was an extraordinary moment. Srila Prabhupada was just, he was there. He was with the cowherd boys, thinking nothing but Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. But we used to say, it was, I suppose, innocent of us. But anyway, we used to say, that Prabhupada had Krishna painted on the inside of his eyelids. So whenever he closed his eyes, he would see Krishna. It was simple-minded, but it showed something of our appreciation for him.
Prabhupada is sitting with there's a cushion from a sofa. I picked that up off the street. Someone had thrown out an old sofa. I picked up the cushion and brought it. And Prabhupada used it. There was no money, no books. I mean, there was no income. Prabhupada would pass the basket at the end of the kirtan and collect maybe $3. People would put coins in, quarters. Prabhupada's first instruction to me was to do my job. I was a teacher for New York City Board of Education, and he said, give your salary to Krishna. You know, I thought I would give up my job. Prabhupada said, no, you do your job. And I asked Prabhupada, well, how do I give my salary to Krishna? Prabhupada said, well, you give it to me, and I'll give it to Krishna. I said, okay. And that's how we were running on. But we had no money. We were using as a subji in the summertime. Prabhupada started in the summer. It was May 66 at 26th Avenue. We would get watermelon, because watermelon was so cheap, 10 cents a pound. And then we'd eat the watermelon and then take the rind and cook that as a subji. And that was one of the best, the big subjis, the watermelon rinds.
When Srila Prabhupada first settled into the 22nd Avenue, he put a sign on the door saying, any young man who wants to follow these rules and regulations can stay here. and learn from me. That's a paraphrase. So, of course, some young men came in. He had already had some disciples, and they moved in and stayed in the storefront. And they would take a shower up in the apartment. The storefront was in a front part of the building that had apartments above it. But then there was a courtyard in the middle. And then there was what's called the rear court building, and that's where Srila Prabhupada's apartment was, on the second floor with windows looking out onto the courtyard. And we used to chant our japa walking around and around in the courtyard. And Srila Prabhupada would look out the window and see us doing our japa, and he'd be very pleased to see his disciples doing that. At that time, the only record, the LP, that had come out was the Krishna Consciousness LP. Well, we would play that, Srila Prabhupada speaking, and his singing of the Sangsara prayers, and also the kirtan on the other side. We would play them in the apartments, but with the speakers right up in the windows going out onto the street, so that the sound of the kirtan was blaring out up and down the block, so everybody could hear it. So we weren't at all shy in those days about presenting Krishna consciousness to the masses. But many people became introduced to Krishna consciousness, or at least the chanting of the Maha Mantra, through those speakers, because people all up and down the streets, when they saw us walking up and down, they would go, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. And that's how they got to know us.
This is Brahmananda, who's Gargamuni's brother, and Prabhupada made him the first temple president and his brother the first temple treasurer. That's me getting up to dance now. And Prabhupada had them pose for my first Lord Nrsingadev painting. He had one of them be Hiranyakashipu, the big demon, and the other be Lord Nrsingadev, and he put one on the other one's lap, and he showed them how they should pose for Lord Nrsingadev to rip apart the demon Hiranyakashipu. And Prabhupada also posed for the painting, making his eyes crossed and showing himself ripping the demon with his hands and showing long nails. And this painting on the window of Matchless Gifts is from a copy of a print that Prabhupada gave me of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Sankirtan party. His performing Sankirtan at the courtyard of the house of Srivas Thakur. And Prabhupada pointed out who the different personalities in the painting are. That's Mukunda and his sons, that's Haridas Thakur, and who the Panchatattva members are. So, and that was my very first painting that I did for Prabhupada. And it was so bad, everything was out of proportion. The feet were gigantic and the heads were small, and the hand was coming out someplace that wasn't connected to the body. But Prabhupada was so encouraging that when he saw the painting, all the devotees would always gather around him. So he said to everybody, Krishna has sent, like Krishna sent me to paint, even though it was so bad. He was so encouraging. And on that day, he also invited me to come and paint up in his quarters. So for the next months, I was painting there. And he would often come into the room, which was the room that he said bells, and give instructions about the paintings.
Prabhupada arrived at the airport a day or two before the Mantra Rock concert. No one knew what to expect. Mukunda and Jamuna had met Prabhupada, but none of us had met Prabhupada yet. There's my dog walking in front of Prabhupada. Allen Ginsberg. We were, of course, delighted and could immediately see that we had made the right choice once we saw Prabhupada. He seemed to light up the whole room. We couldn't take our eyes off of him. And obviously, if he attracted our gurus like Allen Ginsberg had a great influence on most of us. He was one of the leading members of what was called the Beat Generation. He and Jack Kerouac practically single-handedly changed the consciousness of millions of young Americans with their ideas that life should be lived in a very open manner with freedoms and pursuing higher things and throw off the old shackles. And Prabhupada had the stamp of approval of the Beat generation. He was for us.
So this area is known as Hippie Hill in San Francisco's Golden Gate Park. Almost every day, everyone would gather at Hippie Hill, and sometimes the devotees would come and chant. And this particular day was like any other day there. But as I remember entering the park, and what attracted me was the beauty and the sound of I didn't even know at the time it was the Hare Krishna mantra. People have been chanting all around the Haight-Ashbury area for months and months prior to this. The idea that Srila Prabhupada was there that particular day just captured me. That through his sound vibration, he just reached into me, reached into my heart, and somehow or other said, this one is mine. It wasn't maybe a year or so later that I had actually started to join the temple.
Prabhupada had introduced something that all of the youth were really attracted to, and he was really something of a Pied Piper. You can see here how much everybody is participating. These are not just devotees, but all of the people here in the park were completely open to this. As a matter of fact, so much so that they considered the Hare Krishna to be the hippie religion at this point in 1967 in San Francisco. So many hippies were in love with Prabhupada and in love with the devotees and considered themselves very much a part of Hare Krishna.
And did a lot of singing in the park. And so I used to come down, help out, and sing along too. I had been singing Hare Krishna since '63, and it seemed to me that almost as if reinforcements had arrived from India. My idea at the time was that the more Swamis the better, and the more spiritual teachers the better, because America seemed to have sunk in a morass of aggressive and murderous militarism in those days. That was right in the middle of the Vietnam War, and I'd come home from India via Saigon. So anybody going out on the street, particularly, and singing in the street seemed to lighten the whole American scene. That seemed like a breakthrough of joy, dancing, human voice. And so it seemed like a marvelous social contribution.
This historic footage gives us a glimpse into the first Rath Yatra celebrated in the Western world in 1967. On another track, there's a kirtan that goes with this Rath Yatra, and it was the melody that goes something like this. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. And that went for hours and hours as we sang it on the cart. A few wonderful things about this Rath Yatra were that the crowd that gathered alongside of the cart of partly hippies that knew nothing about Lord Jagannath and partly some hippies who had tasted Krishna Prasad in our temple and sampled the nectar of the holy name in our kirtans were very genuinely enthusiastic to celebrate this Rath Yatra. Lord Jagannath, Subhadra, and Balaram faced different directions on the cart, so no matter what side you were on, you were able to get face-to-face darshan of their lordships. There was a pastime with this cart where the engine of the flatbread truck that the deities were seated on stalled. And when we told that to Srila Prabhupada, he said that this was not uncommon, that the cart would stall, even if it was pulled by hand, and stop at various places along the route. So he was happy to see that somehow in San Francisco, without even knowing about this pastime, our cart stalled on the hill. The route was full length from the Haight-Ashbury all the way to the sea. And when the cart arrived at the sea, there was a very wonderful kirtan on the beach.
He was recovering by the ocean for 3 weeks. Gursinner and I were staying there, along with Kirtananda. The four of us were staying in a beach bungalow. And they sent a copy of this reel-to-reel tape. And it was so wild. And it was a brand new tune. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. They made up their own tunes. Unheard of in New York. This was not done. And it was wild. It's, I mean, horns and cymbals and you name it. It was a full wild party sounding kirtan. And some of the devotees in New York were like, oh my gosh, what is this? But Prabhupada loved it. He was so happy. And I noticed this. He was so happy that they were still chanting. It didn't matter that it was a different tune. It didn't matter that they were wild hippies with dancing and frenzies, and probably some of them were intoxicated. Most of them even were still taking intoxication. Prabhupada loved it. And there was another one that they sent called Narada Muni, the Eternal Spaceman, which was a little record that they made. They were creative and innovative and far out. That's the kind of people that were in San Francisco. And Prabhupada encouraged them. Whereas the nature in New York was to criticize them and put them down because they weren't conservative enough. Prabhupada didn't have that mood at all. Instead, he encouraged both. And they were a little wild for me, too, because I wasn't as conservative as a New Yorker, but I was somewhat conservative. But what amazed me was when we went back there, sometime later, we traveled back to San Francisco with Prabhupada. They had completely changed. The chanting had purified them. They were totally different. They were beautiful. I mean, we're talking about Mukunda, Yamuna, Shamsundar, Malati, all these early devotees. Malati was so wild. And they were really heartfelt people, willing to try anything, and they loved Prabhupada, and they were out to do whatever they could.
Swamiji was shot in the early summer 1967 in Srila Prabhupada's apartment at 26 2nd Avenue. He had recently returned to New York from New Jersey and San Francisco. He had had a stroke. He was not in good health, and he decided that he wanted to go to India to recuperate. And we were really distraught because we felt if he goes to India, he's going to stay there. He doesn't want to come back here because it's bad for his health, the cold winters. And we didn't know what to do. We thought, well, we'll never see him again, or if we want to see him, we'll have to go to India. How can we keep him here? Of course, we couldn't keep him there. So the devotees asked me to make a simple documentary, just pictures, moving pictures of Srila Prabhupada. We had photographs to look at. The devotees wanted a film to look at, a movie of Srila Prabhupada, simply something to meditate on so we could feel close to him. And so I asked Srila Prabhupada if I could do that, and he said yes. So I'm simply in his room with him, and he very kindly tolerated my presence there as I made the movie. I didn't direct Srila Prabhupada at all. I didn't ask him or tell him to do anything. I just followed his lead. This was with an 8mm camera, very simple means. And this was the last day that Srila Prabhupada was in New York. He was leaving the next day for India. Kirtanananda was preparing his packing cases to go on the plane. It was bigger than suitcases, they were trunks. You see, this was really our Prabhupada Murti while he was away in India. The devotees would look at this film, we would just chant our rounds, or we would play a tape of Srila Prabhupada singing a bhajan, or have a kirtan while looking at it. So really not much happens in this movie, except we're looking at Prabhupada and he's looking at us. I would have to change rolls of film, and as I did that, one time Srila Prabhupada asked me to show him how the film, which was AGFA, black and white film, high speed, how the film was clipped onto the reel with a little plastic gripper. And Srila Prabhupada asked me to show him how it worked. And after I showed him, he said, "They think of everything." When Srila Prabhupada arrived in India, he was going to India for his health. And when he arrived in India and got off the plane, Kirtanananda, who was with him, who went with him as his servant, said that it was like walking into an oven in a letter that was sent to us, and Kirtanananda's comments were there, and then Srila Prabhupada followed up with his comments, and he said, "I find it quite bracy myself." So that was why he went to India, to get braced up. So it's a pretty simple film, but the beauty of Srila Prabhupada is what makes it fascinating.
I was doing a sign that he asked me to do upstairs in that first place where he was offering arti, a sign of the Hare Krishna mantra, because there was going to be a big program at Tompkins Square Park. So the sign was about 4 or 5 feet on oak tag, and I had to sprawl my whole body across it to reach to the other end. We didn't have easels in those days. So I also apologized to Prabhupada when he came in the room that I'm sorry that I'm offending the holy name. So he told the story of when Krishna had a headache and the gopis took the dust from their feet to put on his head to relieve his headache. And they didn't care if they would go to hell as long as Krishna would be cured. So when I apologized, Prabhupada told me that story and he said it's fine because it's for service.
He used to sit and turn the globe, and he would meditate on the different countries. And he would say, "Brahmananda, you shall go to Russia. Gorsindar, you shall go to Japan. Somebody else, you shall go to South America." You have to understand, we had no money, we had no manpower, we had nothing. We were a handful of teenagers. 10 people in their early 20s who were rather eccentric, all of us, because we had rejected our cultural values and were following him like a Pied Piper. And he was telling us about these different countries we were going to go to and open temples. He had his plan. It was not haphazardly done. I have a beautiful picture of Prabhupada sitting and turning his globe. He did it a lot. He meditated on the globe. He looked at the different countries. You would see him doing it a lot. And he was planning. He planned the takeover of Russia long before he ever went to Russia. This is like a part of what he knew he had to come to this world and do. We just didn't know what all he was doing. Although sometimes in Montreal, when we had a lot of time and he would talk, he used to talk to me about his different plans. We had no money. We lived in a little flat. We had rats too. There was nothing, and yet he was telling me how he was going to have a World Sankirtan party. And he also told me how he wanted to have a big auditorium where people could come and watch bhajans and hear bhajans and see plays and Krishna conscious things rather than going to the cinemas. He felt the cinemas were drawing people into another world. He had plans of doing this. And when I go to Bombay and I see that great big auditorium, I go, you know, he said he was going to do this. It's just like if I'm a pauper and I tell you I'm going to build Disneyland. And that's what it was like. But I never disbelieved anything he said. I just listened.